Thanks very much, and thank you, John, for the invitation to speak. It's been a great day, really exciting, and lots of really interesting directions. So I'm one of the 7 directors within the UK DRI, and my Centre, Care Research and Technology, is a little bit different to the others. Our focus is really on using technology to try and support people living with dementia. That's our primary focus. So I'll be telling you today about some of the technology we've developed, the general kind of direction of travel, but also more specifically, particularly around some work around sleep and nighttime behaviour that we've done. We have a very multidisciplinary team within CR&T, which is a great strength and also a challenge at times. Many of the people in the audience, so I'm going to be presenting things that are really a team effort. So we have engineers, computer scientists, clinicians, I'm a neurologist, and we're really approaching things in a very integrated way, which I think brings with it advantages. So our starting point was originally work done by the Alzheimer's Society, actually, who asked people and carers and their families about their priorities. And one thing that's clear is that people want to stay at home who are living with dementia for as long as they can. And also that on the flip side, ending up in hospital is a really bad direction of travel. And our hospitals are, we have probably about 25% of our hospital beds occupied at any one time with people living with dementia. So we've got this real challenge, I think, that we need to try and work out how to shift some of the care outside of the hospital into people's homes so that we can more proactively manage risk. So these are some of our participants in the study, and we're really working kind of hand in hand with people who are living with dementia to try and develop these systems. I think at the heart of what we're doing is this kind of feeling that we're limited often by a lack of data and a lack of real-world data. If I'm seeing people in clinic and seeing them again in 4 or 5 months, that's just a really bad way to try and manage people. I have very little information about what's actually going on when I'm making these clinical decisions. So on the flip side, I think we have the technologies now to collect and curate and manage large amounts of information from all sorts of sources. And our targets are really around real-world problems. So fundamentally, we're interested in personalising care. We want to kind of focus on things that matter to people affected by dementia, so infections, sleep disturbance, agitation, social isolation. But I think that a lot of the things we're doing have real importance potentially for clinical trials as well. So although I think we're focused on the care side of the equation, we're also collecting data that I think is highly relevant in all sorts of other contexts, and I'll try to illustrate that. So this is just a little bit of data on the scale of the problem. So we have about 750,000 people living with dementia in the UK. About 250,000, so a third of them will be admitted each year to hospital. And many of those will be admitted multiple times. So we have about 760,000 admissions to hospital, and probably about 450,000 are potentially avoidable. So this is a kind of massive target. And then once people are in hospital, they're in hospital often for a long time, and about a third of people don't go back to where they came from, so they don't go back from home to home. So the admission to hospital is the kind of end of the journey, and that's creating an enormous problem within hospital for how we manage this. So how do we support people to live well in their homes? Well, the approach we've taken is to try and think about the development of a smart home, if you like, a digital platform for monitoring information that's relevant for health and care. You've seen this slide that Paul presented before. But the idea is that we've got lots of different types of technology that we can use to collect data from within the home. It might be a smart watch, but we're much more interested in passive technologies, and I'll give you some examples of that as we go through. But each of those bits of information can be informative, but actually it's when you aggregate that information and you have time course data over many months and years that it becomes incredibly interesting as a very rich description of people's lives and how the disease is affecting them. So the data is streamed together in a secure way. We have a cloud platform that allows us to deploy machine learning analytics to try to identify markers of disease progression, but also markers of health changes that are occurring. So the development of infections, falls, these kind of things. And then our study is not a trial, a cohort study. This is a dynamic interventional study, really, where we have a clinical monitoring team who are monitoring our cohort, and they're being guided by this AI AI information that's being fed back to them to try and guide their interventions and to try and produce a much more personalised approach. And just to emphasize this idea that we're trying to integrate multiple streams of data over time. So I think this does qualify to Paul's definition of big data. It's highly variable, it's high velocity, and it's very large in volume. So we have challenges there. And we're building and we've built a system called Minder to try and handle this challenge. This is Afzal and Zora, a couple of our long-standing participants, and it's really just for me to emphasise that I suppose at the end of the day what we're most interested in is trying to support people in their day-to-day lives. If you're interested, there's a link there on the slide, but we have a nice video that captures the voice of people who are participating in the trial, and in general the feeling is that this is a reassuring presence, and they feel supported by the presence of this system. But just thinking about the kind of data science part of it, what does it actually look like? Well, the deployment is using low-cost sensors. So these are things like passive infrared sensors, sensors that allow us to monitoring electricity use in the kitchen, a bed mat that I'll describe in a bit more detail. But we have this kind of range of information or a range of sensors that provide multiple streams of information. This is just a kind of example of the type of data that we have. So on the x-axis is time of day, over 24 hours, and the y-axis is a period of say, a month. And these are from Sarah Daniels, who's our occupational therapy lead. Now, if you're an occupational therapist, you're very interested in the structure of people's activity during their days. You try and develop this, and they do that by obviously going in and doing home visits. And the little dots there are kind of representative of the time of a particular home visit. Now, even with the kind of simplest data that we're collecting, this is movement data in particular rooms, you can immediately get the impression of the structure of this patient's life. You can see on the, I don't know whether we can, well, I got a pointer now, but on the left, the nighttime period where there's very little activity, this patient has a really structured kind of pattern of day. They get up at the same time, they're going to bed about 10 o'clock at night, they're actually watching the television every night at a very particular time. So this is what many of our lives would look like to some extent. There's a structure to this data that's there. In contrast, this is one of our participants who's a 78-year-old woman with vascular dementia who lives alone. They actually had a home visit during the data collection. That was the period that's shown here. But if you look at the rest of her time, her daily activity has very little structure to it. It has a real kind of chaotic structure, actually, which is quite representative of the kind of effects of dementia in the real world, the behavioural effects of it. So we heard about the importance of kind of thinking about the effects of disease on patients in terms of cognition. I mean, here I would argue that we are going more directly to what really matters, which is the behavioural effects of dementia. And we're seeing that in the structure of people's behaviour over long periods of time. So I think with this type of data, with this type of large data, the challenge is shifting from acquisition, shifting from the technological challenges of how we acquire data to one of a data science issue. I think the problem here is you've got so much data flowing in, continuously, 24/7. How do we make sense of this? Because at the end of the day, we want knowledge that is used in specific context to guide treatment decisions or to guide clinical trial studies. But the volume of data makes it a real challenge about how we work through that. So this is Eyal Sorik, who's our lead data scientist within the centre, and I think our challenge is to go through these processes. We've got data, we need to ingest it, explore it, model it, communicate it, and standardise and harmonise it, which I know John, whenever I've presented this in the past, has sort of said, we've got a massive problem with this kind of data. There is no standardisation or harmonisation to lots of this digital data, and this is a challenge, I think, for the community to make it standardised in a way that could be used more widely. So I want to just give you a taste of one facet of the work we're doing. At the moment, we've got a cohort that consists of about 100 people. They're mainly Alzheimer's disease. There's a range. There's people living with a carer, people living on their own, but we've got a diverse group. And one thing we've been interested in is social isolation. So can we measure the extent to which people are going outside of their homes every day, for example? You can get that very easily from our data. And we did that during COVID. And what we showed was the dramatic effect of COVID lockdown, which is what you would expect. Our patients were complying with that, but many of them were living on their own and having almost no social interaction for long periods of time. So our system was able to kind of capture that, and then we're turning that into algorithms that allow us to assess when people are wandering at night, when they're leaving doors open, for example, and that's being integrated within our monitoring system. So just quickly, I want to tell you a little bit about our one particular sensor we're using, which is a pneumatic under-the-mattress sensor manufactured by Withings. And we like this because it's completely passive. It gives us data when somebody's in the bed for long periods, gives us data about physiology, about movement in the bed. And we heard previously about how interesting sleep data is over time. And so this is deployed, and we've had it deployed for a number of years now. And we've validated that with Dirk Jan, who's our sleep physiologist, and we know which bits of the data are accurate related to polysomnography. And we can turn that into really quite detailed descriptions. For example, here, bed occupancy, if somebody's in bed or out of bed, in the blue on the left. And then look at how that's changing over time. So are people awakening? Are they getting in and out of bed at different time points? This is somebody who has a very, very stable pattern of sleep. But actually, many of our patients are highly disrupted. You can see on the right, this is a patient who has a very disruptive pattern of nighttime sleep. And the kind of barcode is really showing how that changes relative to that own individual's behaviour over time. And we have a very wide range of that kind of behaviour within our cohort. Here's 6 patients. We can cluster those into different kind of types of behaviour. And this is getting at the kind of the heterogeneity of the behavioural effects of the disease, really, which I think is a fundamental kind of issue. And we can relate that clustering to more standard clinical assessments here at the ADAS-COG, which relates to kind of patterns of sleep behaviour in the population. Now, we can do something interesting, because I think what we need to know is what's normal in these data sets. And we've done that in part in partnership with Withings, who provided with a very large amount of data from the general population. So this sleep mat you can order it online, it'll be delivered to your house, you can set it up, and many people have done that. So we've looked at a number of million nights. Here's 1.3 million nights of data from the general population. And you can turn that into a description of behaviour over time. Here, it's shown in the middle in different age cohorts, and in orange, it's the patients living with dementia. And these are the different features we're extracting. They include things like bed occupancy, but also physiology, respiratory rate, heart rate, and also estimates of sleep state, which is an interesting kind of area on its own, which I haven't got time to go into. But you can, to some extent, estimate sleep state, which relates to EEG, polysomnographic estimates of that. And that gives us this kind of really interesting kind of way of looking at the effects of sleep. And we can turn that, using machine learning, into a single measure, which we've done, which we call the sleep anomaly index, which gives us a kind of estimate of how abnormal night-by-night sleep is. And then, having done that, we can kind of say, well, which bits of the sleep features relate in particular to dementia. And these are plots that show on the bottom, for example, the number of bed exits somebody has, or the number of, if you look in the middle on the number of bed exits, you can see that as you start to get out of bed more and more, that makes it much more likely that your behaviour is, or you're suffering from dementia in our cohort. And then just to go back to Masood's kind of comment about N of 1 trials, I also share the belief that we should be thinking in the end, because this is how we're operating as clinicians, thinking about whether we can approach this in a kind of N of 1 way. And I think this kind of platform technology allows us to begin to think like that. And it's certainly true that in our population, we often see the effects of drug changes. So this is an example of somebody who had a progressive disturbance of sleep, shown in this raster plot on the left. And then risperidone was started to try and regularize sleep. You see a dramatic effect on sleep, which is also reflected in the change in the sleep state estimates. So I think this is giving us a kind of way that we might kind of explore these complex behavioral effects of drug treatments on an individual basis. So just finally, we can then back project our machine learning anomaly index into the population and then do quite a lot of interesting stuff. We can say we can match our population to a particular group. And just to end with, we've just started, I think 2 days ago, a study funded by NIHR, which goes backwards into the preclinical phase. And this is in the Insight 46 cohort, which is the world's oldest large birth cohort. This is work with John Schott and Louise Robinson. But here we're asking, I think, a different but really interesting question, which is, in a population at risk, where we know the biomarker phenotype of that population, is there a relationship between these digital measures that can be collected over time and either the presence or absence of these particular neurodegenerative markers or their progression over time? Because I think if that was the case, if we could show that there was a relationship, then it would give us a very interesting kind of additional measure to the protein biomarkers that we've been hearing lots about. So I will stop there. And just say that I think there are a number of different ways this platform might be used, but I think we have a potential to use it to augment clinical trials in various ways, in ways that we've heard about the importance of previously. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, David. We've got time for a couple of questions. Ruth. Mic down the front here.
Hi.
Okay.
Oh.
Susan, go first then, Ruth.
Sorry, I've cut in line. Thanks, Dave. That's really great to see that data and really impressive. I've got a couple of questions, but I'll just stick to one. So, as the quality of technology improves, what kind of measures and metrics do you think you'd want to be bringing into a platform like this?
So what types of technology measures do you think?
Yeah. What else do you think we should be looking at bringing into this type of thing?
Yeah. So I mean, on one dimension, we want more rich description of behavioural measures, I think. We steer clear of a video at the moment, so we don't have cameras in the home at the moment, but we are looking at depth cameras which give us a very detailed kind of picture of movement. We're also developing home radar, which is kind of probably on the cusp of being ready to be deployed. So those things would give us much more detailed imaging of behaviour. I think, I mean, clearly it would be great to have brain activity in the system. And we heard previously about the use of home EEG. I think one thing, particularly when you're dealing with people affected by dementia, is really about compliance. We've had lots and lots of problems with the compliance with using things like Apple Watches, using wearables, trying to use EEG. I mean, this is very difficult, to do in this population in the home. So I think although, we have to cross the technology and the benefits of it with actually what people are prepared to put up with and what they want to do. And we've got to get this sweet spot of much more passive assessments, I think, where that's possible.
My question is, where you've looked at drugs that improve sleep, do you see a benefit in terms of slowing or progression of disease? Do you have enough data to see that?
No. So I think So what we want to do is to scale up to larger numbers and more targeted studies. So what we've done so far with the drug interventions is so serendipitous. It's where there have been changes in drugs, and we're looking largely on an N of 1 level. So, for example, with cholinesterase inhibitors, we've got quite a few patients who have changed in dose of that, and we can see, for example, side effect profiles with them. We see pulse rate changes clearly with that particular drugs. But obviously, what would be great is to approach this in a more systematic way and be able to you look either in a clinical trials context or just in a much larger group of patients where you do have these drugs being used. I mean, Rob Howard, for example, is very keen on us to try and go with the risperidone kind of example and think from a neuropsychiatric perspective, because they are using a lot of drugs that have lots of side effects but also can be quite beneficial. And if you had but the dosing of those is really problematic. You don't know how to dose risperidone, and actually if you had this kind of feedback information, week by week or day by day even, you could make much more sensible decisions about how to handle the treatment.
Any further questions? Thank you very much. That was great.